It was a radiant hot day, perfect for a wedding ceremony that promised to be unforgettable. The sky was completely clear, without a single cloud on the blue horizon, and the birds sang cheerfully, as if they were part of the celebration of that grand day. Every sound seemed orchestrated for the moment, adding a layer of enchantment to the atmosphere. Natalie wore a beautiful white silk wedding dress that flowed elegantly, adorned with delicate embroidered flowers that glistened softly under the golden sunlight. Her hair was styled in a sophisticated bun, reflecting the care and planning invested in the event, and small flowers were delicately intertwined, matching perfectly with her bouquet of white roses and fresh lavender. As the church bells rang with a strong melodious sound, announcing the beginning of the ceremony, all the guests gathered in the church courtyard, ready to witness the long-awaited moment. However, inside the room where she was getting ready, Natalie felt a great pressure in her chest, as if each chime of the bells amplified her doubts and anxieties. Each sound echoed within her, resonating with an intensity she could not ignore. Trying to maintain her composure, she looked at her reflection in the mirror and forced a shy smile, telling herself that it was just pre-wedding anxiety, a natural nervousness. After all, it was normal to feel butterflies before such an important day, right? But deep down, she knew that what she was feeling was much deeper than mere anxiety. Outside, in front of the imposing church facade, Natalie could see her friends and family eagerly waiting. They were dressed in their best clothes, showing smiles and chatting happily, sharing in the anticipation of the big event. Her mother, always emotional, stood beside her father, holding a delicate silk handkerchief to wipe away tears of joy that kept appearing. Her childhood friends, always present for important moments, were perfectly lined up, each holding small flower bouquets that matched hers, as if everything were orchestrated in perfect harmony. Every familiar face radiated happiness and pride, but despite all the joy around her, Natalie could not shake the overwhelming feeling that she was about to make a grave mistake. She turned her gaze to the imposing church door, which would soon open, revealing the long aisle that would lead her to the altar, where destiny seemed to await her. The red carpet, meticulously laid out, waited expectantly for her steps, and the flowers decorating the pews exuded a soft, delicate fragrance, filling the air with an atmosphere of romance and solemnity. The sound of the organ began to echo, playing a soft, emotional melody, raising the anticipation inside the church. But suddenly, all Natalie wanted was to run away. Her heart began to beat faster, each beat reinforcing the feeling of suffocation, and the pressure in her chest felt overwhelming. She could feel her hands trembling slightly, and tiny drops of sweat began to appear on her forehead, despite the cool air around her. "Why am I feeling this?" she asked herself, her mind overwhelmed by a mix of fear and uncertainty. She knew that Victor, her fiancé, was eagerly waiting for her at the altar, but instead of feeling love and happiness when thinking of him, what she felt was fear and a sense of impending danger. Natalie took a hesitant step back, taking a deep breath in a desperate attempt to calm her nerves. But the feeling that something was terribly wrong did not dissipate. It was as if every fiber of her being was screaming for her to stop and reconsider what she was about to do. She knew she had to make a decision, and quickly. With one last look at the friends and family waiting outside, also happy and oblivious to the turmoil inside her, Natalie finally understood that she could not go through with the wedding. Something deep within her screamed for her to run away, to leave that situation that was becoming more and more suffocating and frightening. Thus, with a heavy heart and a mind full of doubts, Natalie turned her back on the grand church door and began to walk away. At first, her steps were slow, as if fighting against her own will, but soon they became faster, more determined, each one taking her farther from that terrifying future, toward the unknown, which somehow she hoped would be her true freedom. On the eve of the wedding, Natalie was already in a state of profound nervousness. She could not sleep, as something within her deeply disturbed her. After hours of tossing and turning in bed, unable to fall asleep, she decided to walk around the house in hopes of calming her agitated mind. As she walked through the dark, silent hallways, something made her suddenly stop. A whisper coming from Victor's office caught her attention, and curiosity proved stronger than common sense. Natalie approached silently, and peeking through the slightly open door, heard Victor discussing his illicit dealings with someone over the phone, in a cold, threatening tone. His words chilled her to the bone. Money laundering, fraud, and other criminal activities were mentioned with frightening casualness. If you've been enjoying this story so far, make sure you're subscribed to our channel, as the upcoming stories will be even more thrilling, and you don't want to miss them. So let's continue. Horrified, Natalie finally understood that their marriage was nothing more than a carefully planned facade to cover up Victor's illegal activities. He had even mentioned that the union would help legitimize his operations, something that made her feel nauseous. Trembling with fear, Natalie silently stepped back, her heart racing and her mind in shock. She locked herself in the bathroom, where she tried to process what she had just heard. Tears began to run down her face as she realized the terrible truth. The man she was about to marry was dangerous, ruthless, and corrupt to the core. She knew she couldn't marry someone like that her life and her family's would be at risk. Running away was her only option. On the wedding day, Natalie woke up with an even bigger knot in her stomach. The memory of the conversation she had overheard the previous night wouldn't leave her mind, hammering incessantly at her thoughts. She knew she had to confront Victor, even though the thought filled her with dread. "Victor, we need to talk," Natalie said, trying to keep her voice steady, although she could feel panic rising like a tide in her chest. Each word felt heavier than the last as her heart pounded erratically. Victor turned slowly, his expression shifting from surprise to clear impatience, as if any deviation from the day's perfect plan was an affront. "Not now, Natalie, we have a wedding to start," he replied, his tone laced with irritation, adjusting his tie as if the wedding were just a formality to be completed. "No, Victor, this is important. I heard you on the phone last night," she said, swallowing hard and feeling fear tighten her chest, her breathing growing heavier. "I know about the illegal business," she finished, her voice barely a whisper, but with a weight she hadn't known she had. For a moment, Victor's face tensed, his eyes hardened, and for a brief moment, Natalie saw the mask slip. But he quickly regained control, offering a cold, threatening smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, so you know," he said with a disturbing calm. "This will make things easier," he added, with a sinister smoothness that made Natalie's heart race even faster. She instinctively stepped back, feeling terror take over her body. Every cell in her screamed to flee from there as quickly as possible. "I can't marry you, Victor." Her voice trembled, almost breaking. "Not after what I heard. I can't," she repeated, as if she needed to convince herself of what she was saying. Victor took a step forward, his imposing presence making the room feel smaller. His voice, now low and menacing, cut through the air like a sharp blade. "You will marry me, Natalie," he said, each word laced with venom, "or I will make sure your family pays dearly. You wouldn't want anything to happen to them, would you?" The threat was clear, and the cold tone in his voice left no room for doubt. Natalie felt the blood drain from her face. Her hands began to tremble, and the world around her seemed to spin. "What do you mean by that?" she asked, her voice a thread almost inaudible. Victor stepped even closer, grabbing her chin firmly, forcing her to look directly into his eyes. His eyes, once charming, were now cold and calculating. "If you don't go through with this wedding," he whispered with disturbing calm, "I will hurt those you love. Your father, your mother, your friends, all of them. And no one will escape." Desperate tears began to flow down Natalie's face. She was trapped, caught in a trap she could never have foreseen. "Please, Victor, don't do this," she begged, her voice fragile and broken, almost inaudible. Her heart was crushed with fear and pain. Victor released her with a brusque movement, adjusting his tie again, as if none of it mattered. He smiled, a cruel smile that made her shiver. "Then be a good girl and marry me. It's that simple," he said, indifferent to the suffering on her face. With a heavy heart and fear consuming every fiber of her being, Natalie looked at the imposing church door. With every step she took toward the entrance, the feeling of panic grew inside her, like an unstoppable current. She knew she had to escape, knew that if she didn't, she would be putting not only her life, but also her family's at risk. With one last look at the large church door, and the concerned faces of her friends and family, Natalie made a desperate decision. She turned and ran with all her might, her dress billowing behind her like a sign of her escape. Her heart was beating frantically, and her mind was a whirlwind of fear and determination. She knew time was against her, that Victor would soon find her. But at that moment, the only thing that mattered was escaping from the nightmare her life had become. Hugo, a young writer in search of inspiration, was parked near the church in his old red car. He had spent the entire morning trying to come up with ideas for his new book, but his frustrated attempts seemed increasingly futile. The radio played a soft melody as he scribbled loose phrases in his notebook, trying to force the words to make sense. The church beside him seemed to offer the tranquility he desperately sought to clear his thoughts. Suddenly, his thoughts were interrupted by the sound of fast, gasping footsteps. He looked in the rearview mirror and saw a woman in a wedding dress running towards him, her eyes wide with sheer terror, and her face as pale as a ghost. Before he could process what was happening, the woman opened the car door and got in, closing it with a loud, desperate click. "Please help me," Natalie pleaded, her voice trembling and her eyes brimming with tears. She looked at Hugo as if he were her only hope. Hugo was paralyzed for a few seconds, unsure how to react to the surreal scene unfolding before him. "What's going on?" he asked, trying to understand what could have driven a bride to run like that on her own wedding day. "I need to get out of here now," Natalie said, looking desperately out the rear window, as if expecting to see someone coming after her. "They're chasing me. Please take me away," she begged, her voice laden with despair. Without hesitation, Hugo started the car and sped off, leaving the church and all the confusion behind as he tried to process what had just happened. "Who's after you? What happened?" he asked, glancing briefly at Natalie before turning his attention back to the road ahead. Natalie took a deep breath, trying to control her breathing and calm the fear still pulsing through her veins. "My fiancé, he's dangerous. I couldn't marry him," she said, almost breathless. "I need to escape before he finds me," she added, her voice breaking. Hugo looked at her for a moment, feeling the seriousness and panic in her words. "All right," he said with a calmness he hoped would convey confidence. "I'll help you. We'll find a safe place," he promised, accelerating even more. As he drove, Hugo felt a growing mixture of curiosity and concern. Who was this mysterious woman? And why was she fleeing her own wedding? Although he didn't have all the answers, he knew he needed to protect her. Something in Natalie's gaze made him want to take care of her, to ensure nothing bad happened to her. They drove in silence for a while, the only sound being the engine and the road stretching out between them. Finally, Natalie began to relax a little, feeling that, at least for now, she was far from imminent danger. She looked at Hugo, a complete stranger who, in a matter of minutes, had become her savior. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice still filled with emotion and exhaustion. "I don't know what I would have done without you," she admitted, feeling a slight wave of relief. Hugo smiled, trying to convey comfort. "It's okay," he said. "We'll find a place where you can think calmly about what to do next. Right now you're safe," he assured her, as the car continued down the unknown road. As they traveled, Natalie felt a small spark of hope ignite in her heart. Maybe, with the help of this kind stranger, she could finally find a way to escape the nightmare her life had become. After driving for a long time, Natalie and Hugo finally stopped at a small roadside cafe. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with vibrant shades of orange, pink, and purple, creating a beautiful landscape that seemed to contrast with the chaos they had faced that day. The cafe was modest but cozy, with its aged wooden tables that told stories of years of customers, and cushioned chairs inviting a prolonged rest. The air was filled with the irresistible aroma of freshly brewed coffee and freshly baked bread, creating a sense of comfort and familiarity that almost made them forget the tension. As they entered, the doorbell chimed softly, announcing their arrival. Behind the counter, an elderly woman with a serene expression and gentle eyes greeted them with a welcoming smile. "Welcome. What can I do for you?" she asked, her voice soft and inviting, as if she were greeting old friends. Hugo looked at Natalie, who still had a frightened look, although the cafe's atmosphere seemed to start softening her tense posture. "Let's sit down first," he suggested, guiding her to a table by the window. From there, Natalie could observe the road, and this sense of visual control seemed to calm her a bit. They settled down, and the lady kindly brought 2 menus, leaving them to choose at their own pace. Natalie looked around, absorbing the simplicity of the place and the peace it emanated. The atmosphere was tranquil, and for a brief moment, she allowed herself to breathe more deeply. "It's so peaceful here," she said, with a small smile finally appearing on her face, the first since she had entered Hugo's car. "Thank you for bringing me here," she said, with genuine gratitude. Hugo returned the smile, happy to see her relax, even if just for a moment. "You needed a moment to breathe and feel safe. And honestly, I needed a coffee too," he joked, trying to lighten the mood. After ordering 2 strong coffees and some homemade cookies that smelled irresistible, Natalie took a deep breath, gathering the courage to speak. "I need to tell you everything, Hugo. You deserve to know what's really going on," she said, her voice trembling but determined not to bear the burden alone anymore. She took another deep breath, as if preparing to relive the hardest moments of her life. "The night before the wedding, I heard Victor talking on the phone about his illegal dealings. He was mentioning money laundering, threats against others, and speaking with a coldness that made my stomach turn. I was horrified and made the mistake of confronting him. He threatened me, saying he'd hurt my family if I didn't go through with the wedding." Hugo listened intently, his eyes serious and fixed on Natalie's. He didn't interrupt, simply absorbing each word she said, the gravity of the situation becoming increasingly clear in his mind. "That's terrible, Natalie," he said sincerely, his expression reflecting the shock and empathy he felt. "I can't imagine the fear you must have felt, but you did the right thing by fleeing. I'm here to help you," he assured her with firmness and kindness. Natalie felt a wave of relief at his words. For the first time in a long while, she felt she wasn't alone in this battle. "Thank you, Hugo. I didn't know what to do. Everything seemed so impossible, and I just wanted to protect my family," she said, feeling emotional and vulnerable. "We'll work through this together," Hugo replied, gently holding her hand, offering an anchor in the storm. "You're not alone in this. We'll find a way to ensure your safety, and that of your family." There in that cozy little cafe, something began to solidify between them. A subtle but powerful connection that went beyond the circumstances. Natalie began to feel a growing trust in Hugo, and he in turn felt an increasing need to protect her. As they drank their coffee, they began to share more about their lives. Natalie talked about her doubts regarding her marriage to Victor, about how she had lost herself in the process of planning a future that now seemed never to have truly been hers. Hugo shared his dreams, his challenges as a writer, and how he was always searching for new inspiration for his work, not knowing that their very journey was becoming that inspiration. As the hours passed, their conversation grew lighter. They laughed over small things, commented on the coffee, and each laugh helped ease the tension that had loomed over them all day. As the night wore on, the cafe began to empty, but Natalie and Hugo remained seated, immersed in a bubble of tranquility that seemed to protect them, even if only temporarily, from Victor's threat. With the cafe's welcoming atmosphere and Hugo's calming presence, Natalie experienced a rare moment of peace. She knew, however, that the escape was far from over, but with Hugo by her side, she felt she could face what was to come. They decided to continue the journey. With every mile traveled, the bond between Natalie and Hugo grew stronger. They began to deeply trust each other, and it wasn't uncommon for Hugo to make Natalie laugh, even in the tensest moments. She, in turn, inspired him with her courage, and together, they began to realize that, beyond being escape partners, they were becoming friends. And maybe over time something more. There was a sense of safety between them, a rare feeling for Natalie, who had always been an independent woman, but now saw in Hugo a safe harbor. The journey, however, was far from easy. The old, worn-out car broke down several times, forcing them to be creative to get money and food. Each obstacle they overcame brought them closer together. Despite everything, Natalie felt more confident and protected with Hugo by her side. and he, in turn, was determined to help her find a new life. Meanwhile, Victor, driven by fury and a sense of betrayal, launched a relentless pursuit. His wounded pride and fear that Natalie might expose his secrets made him even more dangerous. He used all his connections, mobilizing powerful contacts and a network of informants to track Natalie and Hugo's every move, making the escape even riskier. Unaware of just how determined Victor was, Natalie and Hugo made small stops along the way. But with every pause, the anxiety of being found increased. In each cheap motel, at each gas station, they took turns keeping watch, always with the sense that Victor was closer than they imagined. One night, while staying in a small, isolated motel on the outskirts of a town, Natalie awoke from a nightmare with a muffled scream, her body trembling with fear. The room was dark, and the air was heavy, as if the atmosphere mirrored the weight of their worries. Hugo, who had been sleeping on the uncomfortable sofa nearby, immediately got up, alarmed by the distressing sound. "It's okay, Natalie," he said in a soft, reassuring voice, trying to calm her as he approached. "It was just a nightmare," he continued, sitting beside her and holding her still trembling hands. Panting, Natalie clutched Hugo's hand tightly, as if the physical contact was the only thing anchoring her to reality. "He's close, Hugo. I feel it, like he's getting closer to finding us," she murmured, her voice laden with fear and foreboding. Hugo looked out the small window, where the silver light of the full moon illuminated the deserted road ahead. The stillness of the place seemed a cruel contrast to the tension surrounding them. "We need to keep moving," Hugo said in a low but firm voice. "We can't take the risk. If Victor is close, we can't let him find us." They quickly gathered their few belongings, stuffing clothes and personal items into their backpacks with urgency, as the motel's silence seemed to amplify the pressure around them. As soon as they left and got back into the car, the atmosphere was tense. Hugo drove with concentration, his eyes fixed on the dark road, while the sound of the tires on the asphalt was the only noise accompanying them. Natalie, sitting beside him, kept glancing in the rearview mirror, expecting at any moment to see the headlights of Victor's car appearing behind them. During one of their stops at a small roadside diner, the apparent calm was broken. Hugo, always vigilant, noticed a man sitting at a nearby table, watching them with excessive attention. The sense of danger was immediate. He exchanged a meaningful look with Natalie, and without hesitation, they left the place quickly, taking a different route to shake off any pursuers who might be following them. Aware that they couldn't keep living like this indefinitely, Hugo knew they needed a safer plan. "Natalie, we have to go to the police. We have no other choice. We need protection, and Victor needs to be reported," he said firmly, determination clear in his every word. Natalie hesitated, the implications of that decision racing through her mind. She feared the consequences, but she knew Hugo was right. "All right. Let's find the nearest police station as soon as possible," she agreed, her voice filled with resignation. The escape was not only physical, it was also a mental struggle against constant fear and relentless time. Every stop, every turn on the road, was accompanied by a sense of urgency, as if they always needed to be one step ahead to avoid being captured. But despite the imminent danger, Natalie and Hugo were ready to face every challenge together. Courage and determination were the weapons they carried in their pursuit of freedom and safety. On a clear, starry night, while camping out in the open, Hugo and Natalie enjoyed a rare moment of peace, almost as if the universe had granted them a truce. The full moon lit up the sky with a soft, silvery glow, casting its light over the clearing where they had set up camp. The stars shone intensely, dotting the velvet black sky, and the gentle sound of the wind blowing through the trees completed the feeling of serenity. Sitting around a campfire, the warmth of the flames embraced them in comforting heat, warding off the chill of the night. Hugo, lost in thought, poked at the embers with a stick, while the crackling fire broke the tranquil silence. Natalie, wrapped in a blanket, watched the dancing flames, her face softened by the calm of the moment. Hugo took a deep breath, feeling the need to express something that had been growing inside him. He looked at Natalie, his heart racing with the emotion of what he was about to say. "Natalie, he began, his voice soft but filled with sincerity. Ever since you got into my car, my life has changed in a way I never imagined. In the midst of all this chaos, I found something real, something I never expected to find. Natalie looked up and met Hugo's deep, sincere gaze. She felt her heart beat faster, and the connection between them seemed stronger than ever. Hugo, she said in a low voice, almost a whisper, I feel the same. You've been my support, my strength. I don't know how I would have survived all of this without you by my side. A smile formed on Hugo's face, relieved and overwhelmed by a joy he couldn't hide. Natalie, I think I'm falling in love with you, he confessed, his words filled with intense and genuine emotion. Natalie's eyes filled with tears, but this time, they were tears of happiness. Hugo, I feel the same, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I'm falling in love with you too. The moment was perfect, almost surreal, as if all the danger and chaos around them had dissipated. Under the starlit sky and the soft glow of the campfire, they leaned toward each other and kissed. A gentle kiss, filled with promises and hope, that seemed to seal the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. Fear and uncertainty began to give way to love, and a renewed hope for a different future. After the kiss, they remained silent for a while, simply enjoying each other's company. The fire continued crackling, casting flickering shadows around them as the night deepened. I knew from the first moment that there was something special about you, Hugo said, still holding Natalie's hand, their fingers intertwined. You saved me, Hugo, Natalie replied, smiling softly. And you keep saving me every day, in ways you can't even imagine. They spent the night talking, sharing dreams, fears, and making plans for the future. The bond between them only grew stronger with every word shared, every smile. In that campsite under the starry sky, Natalie and Hugo found refuge in each other, something neither of them could have predicted at the beginning of their journey. However, the peace they had found was abruptly shattered when Victor finally caught up with them. It was a serene morning, and they were in a small clearing, savoring a rare moment of tranquility. Hugo was making improvised coffee while Natalie organized their things. Suddenly, the distant sound of an accelerating engine broke the silence, making them both go on high alert. Before they could react, Victor's car tore into the clearing at high speed, screeching to a halt just a few meters away. He stepped out of the car, pure fury on his face, his eyes fixed on Natalie as though she were his sole target. You really thought you could run from me forever, Natalie? Victor shouted, his voice filled with rage and contempt, echoing across the empty space. Natalie felt a cold shiver run down her spine. But despite the fear, she didn't back down. She raised her chin with determination. Victor, I'm not going back with you, she said, her voice firm, though her heart pounded wildly. I know who you are and what you do. I'm not afraid of you anymore. Victor took a threatening step toward Hugo, his eyes full of hatred. And you, he said, pointing an accusatory finger at Hugo. You think you can take what's mine? You'll regret crossing my path. Hugo, despite the terror he felt, stood his ground, not backing down. Natalie isn't an object, Victor. She has the right to live her life without fear. You can't control her, he said, his words brimming with conviction. Without warning, Victor pulled out a gun, pointing it directly at Hugo. Oh yeah? Let's see if you still think that after this, he said with a cruel smile. Natalie's heart raced. Please, Victor, don't do this, she cried, stepping forward, trying to prevent the inevitable. If you want to fight someone, fight me. But leave Hugo out of this. Hugo, realizing he needed to act quickly, shouted, Natalie, run! In a quick, desperate move, he pushed Natalie back and threw a stone at Victor, hitting his hand and causing the gun to fall to the ground. Victor let out a cry of pain and fury as he was struck, but his anger outweighed any hesitation. He tried to retrieve the gun from the ground, but before he could reach it, Natalie and Hugo were already running frantically toward the car. Hugo, his heart racing, took the wheel as Natalie jumped into the passenger seat, her eyes fixed on the scene behind them. Hugo started the engine quickly and sped away, kicking up a cloud of dust and gravel as they left the clearing. Victor, consumed by rage, didn't give up easily. Even with his hand throbbing, he quickly got into his car, the engine roaring like a beast in pursuit. The chase through the winding, dark roads was intense, each turn a fight for survival. Hugo, nerves on edge, skillfully drove, veering onto side roads and using shortcuts he barely knew, all to try to shake off Victor. The car rattled violently on the dirt roads, but Hugo kept control, his eyes fixed ahead. Though terrified, Natalie trusted Hugo completely. Her heart was pounding so fast it seemed to echo the deafening sound of the engine. But she knew that together they would find a way to escape this deadly situation. Every second on the road felt like an eternity, yet they pressed on. "We need to call the police," Natalie said, her voice trembling but determined, breaking the tense silence between them. Hugo nodded quickly, not taking his eyes off the road. Grabbing the phone with one hand, he dialed emergency services while steering the car skillfully with the other. "We're being chased by an armed man," he said urgently, speaking rapidly to the operator. "He's involved in criminal activities. We need urgent help." Hugo provided their location details and information on Victor, tension evident in his voice. The police, who had already been investigating Victor for his illicit activities, responded promptly to the call. "Keep moving," said the operator firmly. "We're sending units to intercept him." The pursuit continued at full speed. Natalie, clutching her seatbelt tightly, kept glancing in the rearview mirror, hoping to see Victor's headlights disappear. Suddenly, in the distance, they saw flashing lights on the road. It was a police roadblock, formed by several vehicles blocking the way ahead. "This is our chance," Hugo said, his eyes shining with the hope that they might finally be safe. He accelerated even more, driving directly toward the barricade. Victor, realizing the trap set for him, tried to brake sharply and swerve onto a side road. But it was too late. The police were strategically positioned, blocking all escape routes. With no options, Victor was forced to stop his car, the tires screeching on the asphalt. As he stepped out of the vehicle, fury in his eyes, he was immediately surrounded by officers who didn't hesitate to disarm and handcuff him with speed and precision. A few meters away, Natalie and Hugo finally stopped the car, exhausted and with their hearts still racing. The relief was palpable. They looked at each other, knowing that the nightmare, which had seemed endless, was finally over. A group of police officers approached them cautiously. "Are you two all right?" one of the officers asked, with a concerned but gentle expression. Hugo, still catching his breath, nodded. "Yes, we're okay. Thank you for getting here in time," he replied, his voice filled with gratitude. Natalie looked at Hugo, her eyes filling with tears of relief and profound gratitude. "We did it, Hugo," she said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. "We're safe now." Hugo squeezed Natalie's hand, smiling for the first time since the chase began. "Yes," he said, his heart full of relief. "We did it together." With Natalie and Hugo's cooperation, the police were able to arrest Victor and dismantle his criminal network. The ongoing investigations received the necessary push to culminate in the capture of the dangerous criminal. The danger had passed. Finally, Natalie and Hugo could breathe freely and start thinking about a future without fear, without pursuits. The road ahead was still long, but now, with courage and love, they were ready to face any new challenges that arose. Finally free from the nightmare that Victor had represented, Natalie and Hugo settled in a new city, where they could start fresh. Hugo, always inspired by his journey alongside Natalie, began writing a book about everything they had been through. The words flowed easily, and he knew that the story they shared was about more than just an escape. It was about love, resilience, and second chances. Meanwhile, Natalie found a job that made her feel fulfilled and valued, something she had always wanted, but never had the chance to pursue while with Victor. Gradually, the life they were building together filled with new adventures, new dreams, and most importantly, love. Years later, Hugo published his book, dedicated to the woman who had transformed his life forever. Natalie, his muse, to whom he owed not only his story but also his happiness. In a simple and intimate ceremony, surrounded by the friends and family who meant the most to them, Natalie and Hugo were married. The event, though modest, was filled with love and celebration. It was not just the union of two people, but the celebration of the improbable meeting of two souls who, amid chaos, chose to share their lives. Under the emotional gaze of everyone, Natalie and Hugo sealed their commitment to a life together, ready to face the future hand in hand, with no fears or uncertainties. I hope you enjoyed this fascinating story. So subscribe to our channel and take the opportunity to watch the video appearing on your screen. See you next time.